We're grateful for each and every one of you. Let us know where in the world you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let's begin. The house smelled like smoke, not from a fire, but from the cedar wood I was burning in the fireplace when Madison Carter stumbled in at nearly 2 a.m. Her heels clicked unevenly against the hardwood, her laughter too loud for a woman who claimed she was working late. I didn't say a word. I just watched from the armchair, glass of bourbon in hand, as she kicked off her shoes and tossed her coat onto the counter without noticing me. Her phone buzzed, screen flashing, and before she could grab it, I saw the name light up. Eric Wallace. Her boss. She froze when she realized I was sitting there. "Oh, Rich, I didn't see you." Her voice was too calm, too rehearsed. I swirled the glass slowly, letting the silence press against her. Late night strategy session again. Her smile faltered. "You know how it is. Quarter-end deadlines, client pitches. Deadlines don't leave lipstick on your neck." I interrupted. Her hand flew to her collar instinctively, panic flickering across her face before she forced a laugh. "That's ridiculous. You're overthinking again." That was her favorite word. Overthinking. She'd said it the night I found 2 wine glasses in the sink. She said it when I noticed a hotel charge on her card during a supposed conference. Every time, she dismissed me like I was some paranoid fool. But I wasn't a fool. I was patient. While she slipped upstairs, I opened the drawer beside me. Inside wasn't anger. It was preparation. Documents, highlighted contracts, accounts she didn't know I had been restructuring for months. Madison thought she was clever, playing me for a blind, loyal husband while she climbed her way into Eric's arms. What she didn't know was this. The very clause her father buried to protect the family business was now my weapon. And tonight, watching her stumble into our home like a stranger, I knew one thing for certain. My silence was the beginning of her downfall. Richard Carter wasn't a man of outbursts. He never shouted, never slammed doors, never threw plates like the men Madison used to mock in her girlfriend's stories. That restraint, calm on the surface, but sharp underneath, was the very thing that made him dangerous. The morning after Madison's late-night stumble home, he moved with his usual precision. He brewed his coffee, read the paper, and kissed his daughter on the forehead before driving her to school. Routine. Simple. Predictable. The kind of life Madison had once called comforting. But as she sipped her green smoothie across the counter, scrolling through her phone and pretending nothing had happened, Richard's mind was already 6 steps ahead. "Big week at the office?" he asked casually, leaning against the doorframe. Madison smiled, but her eyes stayed on the screen. "Always. Eric's pushing hard for a new strategy campaign. He wants me to run point." Richard caught it, the way her lips curved just slightly when she said Eric's name. That wasn't the look of a woman talking about work. That was the look of possession, of indulgence. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he filed away every word, every gesture, every tell. Because Richard had already begun preparing his revenge months ago. It started when Madison began taking networking trips that never lined up with the official schedules her father's company circulated. He noticed the receipts, the charges, the timestamps. He built a quiet archive, dozens of folders stored across mirror drives, backed up to a server she didn't even know existed. She thought of him as passive, the dependable husband who paid the bills, fixed the sink, and blended into the background while she dazzled in boardrooms. She had no idea he was the one who could dismantle her world with a single email. That morning, while Madison showered, Richard sat in his office flipping through the old contract he'd kept tucked away in a fireproof safe. 10 years ago, her father, Edward Langford, insisted Richard join the company's inner circle. "Just a formality," Edward had said, sliding the papers across the desk. "An equity clause for optics." But Richard, meticulous as ever, had read every page. Article 9, subsection D, was the one that mattered. It stated plainly, if any family stakeholder engages in reputationally compromising conduct, contingency partners may assume expanded authority until further review. Madison never bothered reading the fine print. She was too busy celebrating her father's empire, like it was her birthright. Richard smiled to himself. Now, she had written her own downfall, with her arrogance, with her public displays, with the little slip-ups she assumed no one noticed. When she came down dressed in a cream blazer, ready to conquer another day of illusions, Richard spoke softly. You should probably talk to your father soon. She froze, the heel of her pump clicking against the tile. What's that supposed to mean? Richard didn't blink. Just a suggestion. Her laugh was forced. Rich, you can't still be sulking about last night. It was nothing. You're overreacting again. That word again. Overreacting. He let it hang in the air, watching her gather her purse and keys before storming out the door. The silence she left behind felt almost peaceful. By noon, Richard had already drafted the message. Crisp, professional, emotionless. He attached screenshots, timestamps, even archived posts Madison thought she had deleted. He highlighted the clause Edward himself had signed a decade ago. The email went to 3 people: Edward Langford, corporate counsel, and the CFO. Not Madison. Not yet. He hit send, and in that instant, Richard's quiet revenge was set into motion. That evening, Madison called. Her voice was breezy, like she had just returned from brunch instead of plotting in hotel rooms with Eric. Hey, you saw that post? Huh, she said, feigning casualness. Richard didn't respond. Oh, come on, she chuckled nervously. It was just office humor. People were joking at the bar after the keynote. Everyone knows it's a joke. Richard finally spoke, slow and deliberate. Talk to your father, Madison. Silence. Just long enough for her to realize this wasn't his usual passive silence. It was loaded, deliberate. What does Dad have to do with this? She asked sharply. You'll find out soon, Richard said, and hung up. She called back 3 times. He ignored everyone. Instead, Richard walked into the garage, where his father's old toolbox sat on the workbench. The initials carved into the side, RC, felt heavier than ever. He opened it, running his fingers over the worn metal latch. His father used to say, real strength isn't about yelling louder. It's about being prepared when everyone else is too comfortable. Richard had never understood that lesson more than now, because Madison thought she was untouchable. She thought her father's name insulated her from consequences. She thought her affair was just a game she could play behind closed doors. But Richard had the claws, the evidence, the patience, and soon, Madison would learn that her greatest mistake wasn't betraying him with Eric. It was underestimating the man who never raised his voice. The following morning, Madison strutted through the lobby of Langford and Wallace like nothing was wrong. Heads turned as they always did, her heels striking marble with a rhythm she had long mistaken for power. She thrived on it. The interns whispering her name, the assistants handing her coffee with nervous smiles, the subtle nods of senior executives who knew she had her father's ear. But what she didn't realize was that whispers had already shifted. People weren't admiring her anymore. They were watching her, calculating, waiting, wondering when the fire would spread. Richard knew. He had seen this kind of unraveling before. Not in marriage, but in business. The louder the facade, the closer the collapse. At home, he kept his schedule unchanged. He fixed the porch railing, picked up groceries, and grilled burgers for their daughter in the backyard. To Madison, it probably looked like indifference. But while she paraded through boardrooms, Richard was moving assets piece by piece. Joint accounts, vehicles, even the lake house her uncle had left them. Each transfer was clean, legal, airtight. By the time she would notice, there would be nothing left to contest. That night, Madison breezed into the kitchen, tossing her phone onto the counter. "You're still in a mood?" she asked, pulling off her blazer. Richard kept his eyes on the skillet. "Not in a mood. Just busy." "Busy doing what?" "Sulking." She smirked, pouring herself a glass of wine. "You know, this whole silent treatment thing is exhausting. If you've got something to say, say it." He finally looked at her, his gaze steady. "Did you talk to your father yet?" The smirk slipped, just for a second. Then she laughed, forced and sharp. "You're unbelievable. Do you really think Dad's going to care about a dumb office post? He knows how things work." Richard leaned against the counter, studying her. "No, Madison. He knows how consequences work. And you've forgotten who wrote the rules you're breaking." For the first time, she faltered. Her glass paused midair. "What are you talking about?" But Richard didn't answer. He wiped his hands, set the dish towel down, and walked out of the room without another word. Silence again. Madison hated silence. The next day at work, the first sign of trouble came in the form of a curt email. "Please report to compliance. Conference room 5B. Immediately." Her stomach tightened. Compliance meetings weren't casual. They weren't scheduled unless something serious had been flagged. Still, she straightened her blazer and walked in with her head high. 3 people sat at the table: the head of HR, the company's legal counsel, and her father's longtime advisor, Mark Holloway. No smiles. No greetings. "Please sit, Madison," Mark said. His tone was clipped, professional, stripped of the usual familiarity. "What's going on?" she asked, sliding into the chair. The legal counsel slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts, her social media posts, the comments, even the private Slack messages she thought had been deleted. One line in bold under her name: "The partnership that really matters." Her face flushed hot. "This is ridiculous." It was a joke. "This isn't about jokes," HR cut in. "It's about reputational risk and governance. Your relationship with Mr. Wallace has raised serious concerns." Her jaw clenched. "Relationship? That's absurd. Eric and I are colleagues." Mark interrupted, voice low and deliberate. "Madison, you need to understand. The board has been contacted. The clause your father signed 10 years ago has been invoked." She blinked. "What clause?" The silence that followed was heavier than the walls around them. Her father's advisor sighed. "Article 9, subsection D. In the event of reputationally compromising conduct by a family stakeholder." The rest of the sentence blurred in her ears. She felt the blood drain from her face. That clause. The one she waved off years ago when Richard mentioned reviewing it together. She laughed, glass of wine in hand, and said, "Just sign it, Rich. It's all formality anyway." Now it was her noose. "Who? Who invoked it?" she asked, voice breaking despite herself. Mark's eyes met hers. "Richard." Her throat tightened. "My husband." "Your husband," HR confirmed. "Effective immediately. Contingency rights have shifted. Your access to discretionary funds is suspended. We expect full cooperation during this review." Her breath caught. She wanted to shout, to argue, to demand her father fix this. But for the first time in years, she saw something she'd never expected: doors quietly closing around her, one by one. That evening, Madison stormed through the front door. "What did you do?" she hissed, slamming her purse onto the counter. Richard sat at the dining table, reviewing papers. He didn't flinch. "You went to the board? You went to my father?" Her voice cracked into disbelief. "You can't do this. You're my husband." He looked up slowly. "I'm your husband, not your shield, and not your fool." Her chest rose and fell with shallow, furious breaths. "Do you realize what you've done? You've destroyed everything. For me, for us." "No, Madison," he said, voice firm. "You destroyed it. All I did was shine a light on the mess you made." She shook her head, eyes wet but defiant. "You think you've won? You think this little stunt will end me? I built this reputation. I am this company." Richard leaned back in his chair, his calm sharper than any yell. "And that's the problem. You thought you were untouchable. But empires built on lies collapse faster than houses built on sand." For the first time in a long time, Madison couldn't find a comeback. Richard turned back to his papers. "Pack a bag," he said quietly. "By tomorrow morning, this house won't be yours to walk into." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. And as the silence pressed in, she realized the man she'd underestimated all these years wasn't just planning a fight. He was finishing it. The morning Madison tried to unlock the front door, the realization hit her like a blade. The keypad blinked red. Again. Denied. She pressed harder, as if force could reset the truth. But the truth was already written into the system. Richard had changed the locks. The Ring camera recorded everything. Her frantic tug on the handle, her disbelieving laugh, the way her expression cracked when she understood. She circled to the garage. Locked. Side gate. Locked. Finally, Richard buzzed her in through the back entrance. Not out of mercy, but necessity. He wanted her to see what waited inside. The guest room was prepared with surgical precision. 3 suitcases packed with her belongings sat at the foot of the bed. On the mattress, a thick manila envelope bore a yellow note. "All further matters go through counsel." Madison tore it open. Inside were signed filings, asset divisions, trust transfers, her car lease termination, frozen accounts. Methodical. Final. She dropped the papers, her hands trembling. "You can't just erase me like this," she whispered, her voice breaking into a raw edge. Richard stood in the doorway, calm, arms folded. I didn't erase you, Madison. You did that yourself. I just collected the pieces. Tears threatened, but pride stiffened her jaw. We can fix this. Please, Rich, think about our daughter. Our daughter will grow up knowing her father stood for respect. Richard said firmly. Not manipulation. Not lies. Her lips parted, but no words came. She had wielded power for so long. She had forgotten what it felt like to lose it. The company moved faster than she expected. Within 48 hours, Madison was summoned to an executive tribunal. Compliance presented evidence. Her social media posts, Slack messages, expense reports routed to undisclosed accounts, hospitality events that were nothing more than cover. She tried to argue. This is a witch hunt. My record speaks for itself. Your record, counsel replied flatly, now includes reputational damage, misuse of company funds, and a direct violation of Article 9. Her gaze darted to her father, Edward, seated in silence at the far end of the table. He looked older than she'd ever seen him, shoulders heavy, eyes bloodshot. When she searched his face for rescue, she found only resignation. You handed him the trigger, Edward said quietly, voice hollow, and all he had to do was pull it. Her stomach twisted. Dad. He shook his head. Don't. You mocked the one man who was actually watching. And now you've cost me everything. The words cut sharper than any ruling. The courtroom followed soon after. Beige walls, heavy silence, the judge's voice steady as stone. Based on the filings, the prenuptial agreement, and the invoked contingency clause, she declared, the petitioner, Richard Carter, retains ownership of the primary residence, the inherited properties, and business trust holdings. The respondent, Madison Carter, is awarded a fixed settlement not exceeding 35% of the estate. Spousal support denied due to misrepresentation of financial records. The gavel struck once. Final. Madison didn't move. The courtroom emptied around her, but she sat frozen. Her mask of composure cracked at last. She finally turned to Richard. Her lips trembled. Was I really that disposable to you? Richard rose, steady, no gloating in his eyes, only clarity. No, Madison. You made yourself disposable the moment you treated our marriage like a prop. He gave her a single nod and walked out, leaving her in the silence she feared most. Outside, the air was cool and still. Richard slid his hands into his pockets, his steps unhurried. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. Not triumphant. This was a victory. This was survival. He thought of his daughter, of the quiet mornings and steady routines he'd fought to protect. And though Madison's empire had crumbled around her, Richard wasn't thinking of revenge anymore. He was thinking of freedom. And for a man she had once dismissed as overthinking, freedom was the sweetest revenge of all.